Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of SIG Node. It is Tuesday, October 26, 2021. I think we have a pretty short, it's growing. We have an agenda for today. Sergey, would you like to kick us off telling us about what's going on with PRs?
Yeah, we down on PRs. I think many PRs got unassigned from SIG Node label because they are not related to SIG Node. So cleanup happening, and we closing out of closed PRs. Mostly it was work in progress or some performance optimizations, like minute performance optimizations that people were suggesting. Nothing that got lost in this PRs. Nothing that I found of. And merged PRs, we have one of the cap PR merged. So this is great. And we will discuss PRs later, PR status for the soft deadline. So yeah, I mean, nothing very big happened this week, but if you're interested what is happening, what PRs being created and such, just click the links on the table.
Cool. Do you think we could mark the ones that are going into beta versus alpha? Because I know that we wanted to sort of treat the beta versus alpha ones differently since alpha things aren't on by default.
Do you mean next table for enhancements?
Oh yeah, next table. Sorry.
Yeah, we can go into it. Sure. Let me add a column. I can do that.
And I shouldn't have assumed. I assumed that this was your table, Sergey. Because
it
wasn't me.
I didn't put my name. Yeah, it was.
So moving into the next agenda item, review from our soft deadline last week.
So ephemeral, like I took all the caps from this spreadsheet that the release team is tracking. I think ephemeral containers goes to beta, and somebody's typing. And PR is already merged, so status is very good. I think there's some documentation that needs to be updated or such. In place pod update. There is a agenda item for today about this cap. So PR is out, but it's still a little bit in progress. I don't know if we want to talk about it now. Vinay, do you want to talk about it now? Is Vinay here? Okay, later then. So yeah, but PR is out, so it's meets our criteria for a soft deadline. Then container identifier was removed from milestone. I think they failed to update cap. Kubernetes CRI support. PR is out and it needs to be reviewed. I think this PR introduces support for both versions of CRI.
So on that one, Sergey, we need some discussion. I'll curate. I've added an agenda item.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I remember we've been discussing that we want Kubla to only support one CRI, and I was wondering what is the status of that, and like how do you want to proceed with it? Anyway, thank you for adding the agenda. Then Kubernetes credential provider. Work in progress PR is out. I think IDT created this PR, and I know that as a result of this PR, many unit tests are failing. There is a separate issue tracking that, and I'm not sure whether it's like how much progress we are making on that. In general, it's not a very big cap, so I wouldn't expect much troubles, but I'm not sure whether, it's beta. So I think soft deadline doesn't really apply here, so we don't want to cut it out of the milestone yet.
So if it's beta and it missed this, like unless it was, it kind of missed for a few days, it should be merged already if it was beta and we want to graduate it. Because the idea is we don't want all the beta stuff that's going to be on by default to merge last second in the release cycle, because then that makes code freeze really miserable for people maintaining, try to get the tests working.
Yeah, and it's already failing some tests. So detaching kubelet credential provider out of 3 makes something fail. So I don't know, do we want to cut it? I think IDT authored that, so I don't think she's on the call.
Yeah, I think that this isn't at a great time for her. I mean, I would assume at this point that unless it's like very, very close to merging for beta, anything that is not merged for beta at this point probably is going to get cut from the release.
So I think the impact on this one is that it just further extends the timeline for Tree cloud providers. But yeah, it'd be best if we can get her input on the latest state.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that, but I do know I looked at least 2 weeks ago, and I think the unit tests were failing then. So if it's not getting looked at, I'm not sure how we're going to land it.
Okay. Next one, VPA CRI changes. I think it's rolled into in-place pod update. So I think we can talk about it in such an agenda item for in-place pod update. So yeah, this is just part of the PR that part of the cap that needs for in-place pod update.
Sounds good.
Swap support. I think there is no
Swap
PR.
won't make it. There's a
So,
bunch of reasons Swap won't make it. One is that I still don't think we have support in the CRIs. Two is that we have a lot of work to do, and I've spent most of the release fighting with failing tests and like bugs and regressions from 122. I haven't had any time to work on it. And I don't think anybody else has been working on it. So I think it's going to slip.
Okay. So next one is pod resource API. PR is merged. It's a small change for pod resource APIs that only report allocatable resources. That's good. Ensure secret pooled images. So PR is out, but it still contains a few to-dos inside the PR. I don't know whether
that should be okay because it's alpha.
Yeah,
but we want to get it like
Mike.
It should be reviewable at this point.
To-dos, we're just figuring out where you want to put any docs on it. The text exists already in the PR for what needs to be shown on the kubelet feature gate.
Perfect. Okay, so there is a PR in the document, so let's review.
The PR does look like it needs a rebase, and it's got a hold on it. So maybe make sure that those are all dealt with so that somebody can go and look at it.
I'll rebase it right now.
Thank you, Mike. Next one, reject SMT aligned workload. PR is merged, so this is on track. Next one is alpha, improvement for grateful termination to support priority class for grateful termination. PR is out and it's alpha, so it's on track. And last one is alpha for gRPC probes. I think PR is good. We just need a few more eyes and like just finally merge it. It was out for a very long time, so we need to. I mean, it's it gets much better now. So there were some issues with the PR, but now I think it's fine.
Sergey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, you just missed the one PR from Kevin, which is alpha, and I'm going to add it, but it's merged already. So just for the record, I'm adding it right now to the document.
Is it tracked as SIG Node?
Yes, sharing the link in the chat. Again, I think it should be all good, but just for tracking purposes, I'm adding to the sheet.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just don't see it in the release tracking sheet. But yeah, if it's tracked, we can double check.
I guess we have a couple missed here, but I think about it all is merged, so we are okay. Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, I remember we started working on checkpoint as well, but I don't see it in the release tracking either. Is it? Does anybody know whether it's being moved forward?
I think it's PR's out, but at least I don't have bandwidth to review. So I don't know. Other people did reviewed. There are a couple of things I think is missed in the trackboard, and yeah.
The only thing that I think we're missing is the 2902, at least from the stuff that were in the email.
Yeah.
And if that's merged and it's alpha, then all the better. I added some coloring for things so we can see at a glance kind of the status currently. Anything else for this topic?
Hello, can I ask a question about the one of the PR? It's an in-place plot update.
Sure.
Yeah, I remember in one of the meetings, it was suggested to break up this PR. This is a large PR into several smaller ones, so it's easier to review. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it's a very big PR. I don't know if Vinay was here to talk about it, but I was hoping it could at least be broken to discrete commits.
Yeah, Cassie, that's a really good question. We did discuss, but Vinay is not here. He might join later, I guess, because he put another later to our agenda. So hopefully once he joins, we can ask him.
Okay.
We did discuss this
Yeah,
one.
we can circle back to this one.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that will be easier to review and then to move forward. Otherwise, it's a huge one, right? It's not easy to review. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Anything else on the table?
Nope.
Oh, it looks like
Let's
we
move
were
on.
missing the C advisor list stuff.
Yeah, I
So-
was wondering about it. So, okay. This is as well is not tracked by release team, so we need to ping them.
That's interesting. I'll double check that. Are you sure it's not being tracked by the release team?
I just
It says
searched through
track-
the
Is
enhancement
it,
tracking.
yeah, you might have missed it because it says tracked yes when you click on the issue. So I think it's being tracked.
Okay.
Okay. I think let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Next, we have Marlo talking about CPU allocation.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm just for some background, I'm at Intel. I'm doing resource management stack for NPG within Kubernetes. And one of the things that we need to solve for our customers, and there's 4 different companies currently interested in this solution, is figuring out how to honor ISIL CPUs from the kernel and basically how to have some CPUs in a pod that are pinned and some that are just floating. And considering the number of requests I've had, this is a real issue. I'm trying to gather a group of people in the community already who've worked on this or are interested in working on this and solving this problem, or even customers that have use cases, so I can get a full what we need to solve together and start working on a CAP related to it. I can put in the chat, it's already in the agenda, the 2 previous stabs at this, but neither of them are fully to fruition.
So the linked stuff in the agenda seems somewhat different. So just to clarify, are you trying to have the kubelet pool the set of CPUs it reserves for the system from a different CPU pool, or are you trying to deal with end user workloads that the kubelet runs, being able to say container 1 in this pod is assigned a particular CPU set, but container 2 is on the shared one?
It's a whole set of problems, so it may spin out different caps, but both apply for what our use cases are. I mean,
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is some of those use cases are already implemented. So I was just trying to figure out what the gap is. So like for context, you should be able to, if you had like a certain CPU manager policy on the system reserved CPU reservations are done by a particular algorithm that picks like 0 and 1 first, for example.
Sure. But
Yeah.
when you're looking within the pod level, so for instance, if you're running, I'm going to say VPP because that's one of the use cases. So if you're trying to run VPP, it needs particular CPUs in particular numozones that need pinning, right? And those channels need to not change and float between.
Yeah, so that's why I was just trying to figure out if you're looking on trying to isolate the management component of the node, the kubelet and runtime and similar things, or if you're trying to do something within the pod.
It's within the pod.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or being able to do it within the pod. There's no capability there.
So that's what I also wanted to clarify on, because there are a number of capabilities now within CPU manager and topology manager. So just like if you had a set of use cases that you wanted to share, whatever group we pull together here, we could probably best reach mutual understanding on what is or is not actually possible now.
That would be fully helpful. Shall I link you in?
Yeah, this is Derek. I'd be happy to help. And other folks who may not be here but are active in this space would be Kevin Kluska from NVIDIA.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll contact you after to get the actual spelling.
Thank you.
Should we move to the next topic?
Yeah, let's do that. Next topic from Adrian is looking for approver feedback on a cap. So that it can be ready for 124. Is Adrian here?
I don't know if Adrian's here, but I think Dawn, he just is looking for.
Yeah.
Your,
I'm going to review. It's just don't have bandwidth at this moment. So yeah, I know that is in my queue. But I'm looking for another people also together with me to review this one. I think the Tao actually already provide a first line of the review here. So yeah, I will sync up with Tao too. Yeah. But I'm going to be the approver for this one.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
I have a question on this one. So this one said the goals is just for forensic use cases, not for migration. I'm just wondering whether we can, since we're going to do the checkpoint, right? Whether it's good to consider, the migration use case too. Otherwise, when we, merge this later, we find out, oh, we need to the same thing. Checkpoint can be used for migration. We have to change some of the design. It could happen. I'm just thinking whether we can expand the goals to include those.
Ronald, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think like we discussed a lot of the use cases and we decided to take baby steps here to kind of tease out the problems, and whatever we are doing here won't prevent us from addressing migration. But right now there are a number of like outstanding questions on how a restore will work with like multiple containers and networking and things in progress. So I'm happy to link you to some of the comments captured earlier.
Cassie, this is also back to like the in-place upgrade, right? Update one, because this is why we are kind of like the in-place update. We didn't really break. Initially, we also break many things, but didn't really. It's hard for us to move forward. So that's why at this moment, VNet is so hard to break into the pieces. So, but this one we kind of from day one we think about it, we can break into the baby steps, milestones, and to verify the value for like the one node level value. So that's and then we can start to think about migration, because migration is such a big topic. Even it is maybe bigger than the in-place update. So that's why from day one we kind of break and make people think about there's the value, validate that the correctness and the functionals, and then think about the migration. So.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. As long as we keep in mind that no restriction for future support of migration. Yeah, I haven't taken a look at this. I will go through this I just want to make sure this, this design or this proposal will lead us to the, more complicated design of migration.
I think the other thing is, and Adrian's not here, but at least when we had a lot of discussions on it, it initially started from the migration scenario, and then we got feedback from various other users who were interested in actually doing something that was not in the user visible data plane first. So that's where this forensic scenario took root. And so I anticipate one will build on top of the other in the future, but this narrow use case was pretty clear and sensible from like a security standpoint as well.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So Kathy, since you are actually into these migration cases, maybe you can also help to review this one to think, just focus on extensibility about the design.
Yeah.
We did at the beginning, we did set some principle, also make sure we could extensible, but we also don't want to at this moment to start from a lot of pod level on user facing API at this moment. We want to make that is more like the node content feature at this moment. Because once you start those API change, all the things, that's take forever, right? So unless you really settle down for all the use cases, so you could help. Can you help on the CAP and the PR review, but to keep in mind that we want to extend it, but we don't want to expose those API change at a really earlier stage until we figure out migration. So that's kind of the original we discussed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
I will review it. Yeah.
Okay. And I think it sounds like we're ready to move on to our next agenda item. I don't think that we have Vinay, but let's talk a little bit about in-place pod vertical scaling. Looks like Vinay is apologizing for not having a chance to address remaining action items. Did we also want to talk about splitting the PR? Kathy, you had something to add on this, right?
Yeah, for this, I think, one of our team members posted a comment on about the latency. Yeah, Vinay has not addressed that yet, but I can see, yeah, he's busy. So maybe we will reach out to him over Slack, or maybe he will come to the next week's meeting.
I would suggest, if at all possible, to not wait until the last minute. It sounds like from his comment that he has started a new role and might not have a lot of time. So if you want to pick this up and run with it, I think that would probably be a reasonable thing to do.
Okay, I see. Okay, let me think about this. This is a big, I think a lot of codes, right? Okay, I'll think about this. How about that? And get back to you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just my advice, given how we're getting close to code freeze, and a week delay at this point means not just a week of delay for you, but also a week of delay for reviewing and whatnot. So I would not, personally, if it was me, would not wait a week just to see if Vinay will come around to it, given that he said he has limited availability already.
Yeah, I'll see if I have enough bandwidth, yeah, to do this. Yeah, I'll try my best. Yeah.
Sounds good. Anything else on that one? Sounds like no. Moving right along. Renal and Mike Brown, Cri Pr Version Support.
Hey, so we have a PR open that supports multiple versions of CRI in the kubelet. And Derek and I were chatting earlier whether that makes sense or we should always have the kubelet support one version of the CRI at a time, and the runtimes can support multiple versions at a time if needed. So Mike, you want to share your thoughts, like what we've been chatting in the background?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the container runtimes need to support end versions of the CRI API and can certainly post that up over gRPC. But the issue we have with moving forward by adding that to our service versions of the container runtimes is having a version of kubelet that supports, the newer versions of the container runtime interface. So we're running into this, what comes first, the egg or the chicken kind of problem, and need to bust through that. One option that Sasha had put through was certainly this option for, kubelet supporting both the current version of CRI and the prior, without a switch, just automatically going to the current most updated version. And if that's not exposed on the container runtime, then falling back to the prior. But either way, we need the test buckets to have some kind of scoping for testing on a container runtime that has access to these CRIs. So what we're looking for from SIG Node here is some recommendations on how we should move forward. I think it makes sense to have a kubelet support either with a feature gate or certainly just by checking the latest. And that way we'll be able to move forward with Cri API changes going forward. This isn't just going to be a V1 versus V1 alpha, this release. It's going to be in the next release, we'll have a V1 versus 2 kind of problem that we have to resolve. I might have talked too much. So if we can come up with a way to test it, the newer versions, then we can certainly push that back to an older version of container, our container D, for example. We could do it in service. But again, we want to be able to test this stuff before we add it to a service level version of the container runtime. Thoughts, Elena? Or others?
Yeah,
Derek?
Derek, if you have any thoughts.
I think I appreciate the testing challenge. I think what I'm hung up on, just in a total transparency, is having the kubelet support multiple CRI levels feels like a step backwards from the original intent of the CRI itself, which was
what it really is how do you move forward, right? If I upgrade kubelet, but I haven't already updated the container runtime, then how does kubelet move forward, right?
I guess I'm trying to, and just be patient with me. I'm just letting you know that I'm dealing with that mental gymnastic right now of saying, hey, the whole intent of the runtime be versioned with Kubernetes needs and not vice versa. And what I'm worried about is we'll come back to a situation where it'll be early Kubernetes where we were having to deal with particular API versions of the Docker engine at that time, right? Whether it was, I forget the versions now, 13, 16, 17, that type of thing.
Yeah, that was a huge problem.
And so I feel like if we go down this path, it might be something we need to tread super carefully on, because I feel like it is undoing one of the original goals.
Actually, that's not true. The original goal, what we had, it is just that Docker API is not never think about compatible with Kubernetes. So that's why we want to define our API. And it's not like we only want to support one. So we originally it's just like we try to define API, the container for container runtime, and which it is naturally compatible with Kubernetes use cases, right? And I have the pod concept initially, and had the container, and the problem it is back then, no matter it's the Docker or Rocket, they are not really think about our Kubernetes use cases. Once came from the only pod without container concept. Docker only think about the container without the pod concept. So that's why, so we end up, at least myself, end up to just discuss with both sides, cannot reach agreement. So that's why I said, okay, let's define that API. So to call out who can support that API, Kubernetes needed. But we do, this is why we have the alpha, we do think about the, so this one, it is a little different from the Docker because it is under our control. The only question it is, even under our control, there's the overhead. How much overhead we want to handle today? And do we think about the, because if we are thinking about the all the customer today usage, users about Kubernetes do the bundle upgrade on the node, then I think maybe we don't need to go over this kind of the multiple version CLI support. You already do the bundle and you could decide it, right? So what kind of container runtime, which API you want to support during the node creation time, why we need to carry those overhead. But if it is like the out of box, you already have the container runtime, and then you later in place install Kubernetes. If a lot of use cases like that way, maybe we need to think about it, right? So you may end up have the different version of the Kubernetes for the OS out of OS, because that's kind of a trend about the container optimized operating system. That's I know many company, many cloud providers doing such things, right? Then we maybe have to support more than one API and give some grace period they can migrate. That's what I'm thinking here. We just need to understand our customer and users here.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of what we're looking at here. So how do we migrate? I think is the biggest issue. If the container runtimes aren't on the exact same release cycle, how do they know which one to package up, which container runtime to package up? You know.
Yeah, it's an overhead. Like whether we want to have that overhead in the code, like we haven't measured what the overhead is in terms of CPU, memory, and how our customers are upgrading. So in our case, we always update the runtime and the kubelet at the same time. So it's kind of tightly coupled.
But Manu, how long we are going to support this V1 Alpha 1? That's
yeah. So exactly. So V1 Alpha 1 is going up. So I think we're going to V1. I think the next big one will be when will we have a V2 Alpha 1 is when we'll probably run into this question again.
Right. So how we handled this in Containerd was we implemented the V1 API natively, right? And if you're still using the V1 Alpha API, it does a marshal and marshal cycle on the APIs as they come in for both the response and for the call. So there's a little bit of extra overhead for V1 Alpha APIs right now. And when Kubelet moves up to V1, it'll be just native speed. Although I wouldn't say it's a whole lot slower, but yeah, there's certainly some marshal and marshal efforts going on all the parameters. And thus it's going to depend on how deep the arguments are, right? For what's being passed, how many annotations, for example.
Yeah.
I would like to add also one topic to that. So it's not only about like how we install or updating kubelet and runtimes. It's also about what kind of user experience we want to get. Like, do we want to expose the error message saying what you have incompatible component, or you have a components which try to agree on some version? I think this negotiation is a bit better for the user.
Yeah, and that's what SASH's PR has in it. I reviewed it. It looks pretty good. Basically, when Kubelet tries to mate up with the container runtime, it's just going to check the latest version of the API. If that's not available, it'll go to the prior. And then if there's a reboot of the container runtime, for any particular status type change or bug type fix in the node, without acquiescing the entire node, then Kubelet will reestablish connection with the container runtime. It looks pretty good. And then if you reboot Kubelet, it will attempt to initially establish connection on the new version of the container runtime API again. Okay, and the container runtime certainly already supports both versions of the API at the same time. So
yeah, so I guess like practically, what is the test matrix we would run in the core kube project itself, though, right? Like, are we really going to run side-by-side matrices, or like how would we? How Mike, would you want the project to best present them?
I guess, from that perspective, because we do need the buckets to be tested, we should have some kind of a feature gate or whatnot to pick the version of the container runtime that, from the two that we want to execute against for this bucket, so that we can iterate those buckets once, right? And then again with the other API. And also it would be nice to have a bucket that tested this reboot feature, right? Restarting the container runtime and or restarting Kubelet, and being able to establish a connection with the node still alive, for those type situations. I can tell you that in Containerd, we test at the integration level, the V1 API, and then we use Cri tools to test against the V1 Alpha API. But we also need a change into Cri tools to be able to test both versions of the API at the same time. And it doesn't have a switch, to my knowledge, at this point, to be able to go back and forth. Jared.
Can you refresh my memory, Manol, on how long, to Don's question, did we say the alpha form would actually stick around for?
I think we shouldn't have alpha once the runtimes already have one release out with the V1, because practically there is no change between those two versions right now. Like we when we talked about moving to beta, we said like we have all this pain of updating the runtime, moving it back into the CI, and like basically a long cycle to update everything. So we decided we'll just move the API to V1 as a one-time step and skip the beta and get rid of the V1 Alpha 1 after we do that. So I guess, like, Mike, how long do you anticipate Containerd users to be using that V1 Alpha 1 version? And
I expect that we'll have to keep that for a considerable amount of time, or at least until that the release of Containerd has gone out of service, which is usually about a couple of years, or between a year and a couple of years. Depends how many versions of Containerd we release. Okay. Of course, Kubelet isn't the only customer of the CRI API. We also have K3S and other products from various manufacturers that are using our interface. So we'll just keep the V1 Alpha for a while. I'll probably, because the way I did it, I should be able to add a V2 API as well, and then proxy V1 to V2 when we need to get there.
But Mike, I want to ask you one thing. So, okay, I understand Containerd have different customer users. Not everyone's Kubernetes, right? So, but we are only focused on Kubernetes user here.
Yeah,
right. Customers still can use in Containerd, and which have the CRI V1 Alpha 1, the old one, and anyway Containerd
Alpha 2,
support, right? So it's not they're also out of support policy. So it's their call. But we are talking about from the Kubernetes perspective. Then from Kubernetes perspective, we call out right now, we are moved to V1 CRI version. So I think customer, if they are the Kubernetes customer, I mean author, like the provider, they are going to bundle. If we still think about the bundled, it is our majority use cases, then they just upgrade.
So right now, the only version of Containerd that supports the V1 API is the version 1.6 beta, which we should be able to GA within the next few weeks to a month at the outside. Okay, so we'll be able to in sync ship a version of Containerd that will be suffice for your packages for Kubernetes users. That I don't think that would be an issue this cycle. Okay, that said, I probably also need to move this the support for the V1 API back to the prior version, which is 1.5.6, I believe, or 7. We're up to now. We'll need a 1.5.8 Containerd to be available for your customers that don't want to move up to 1.6 of Containerd. Okay, but I have no way to test it yet. I need a version 1. I need a version 1 API version of Kubelet. Right now, Kubelet is hard coded into the V1 Alpha 2 API. But as Murnal said, the good news for everybody is all of the major features, are in both APIs right now. So really, we're just talking about the the Golang kind of gRPC kind of issue. How do we get the right API connected?
So just trying to understand, if we carried this as a temporary feature in Kubelet for one release and said in the next release of Kubernetes, V1 Alpha 2 is not supported anymore, is that a reasonable?
Yes.
Is that the time overhead we're really tracking here?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I
think with the caveat that we don't have any serious performance regression overhead thing. It shouldn't be, but I think we should at least measure it.
Yeah. Basically, the goal, it is a smoother aggregation, but at the same time, it is overhead, minimize our overhead for community. Right? Because we communities cannot carry that big overhead. So let's settle down for just one release. And unless the measurement, after we measure and found too much of the problem, then we can come back to see how we are going to extend it. But the goal is minimize those things.
Yeah, but then to add on to that, I agree. Like, I think there's like the cognitive overhead, but the performance overhead, I would view it as a blocker if I have to pay any marshaling cost. Because many of our environments are very resource constrained, and so I'm very sensitive to that. So I guess, Bernal, you've been looking at Sasha's PR. Is there any marshaling overhead?
Yeah, so I just asked Sasha. We'll work, and we can, I think between Mike, Sasha, and me, will get those numbers out, and then we can make a decision like whether the overhead is acceptable or not. So we also like this. It also introduces internal types, and there's a conversion to the internal types.
Yeah, so if that overhead's significant, I think that's a real issue.
Right.
So yeah, if we can get that data, that would be useful.
Okay. All right. So I think we have the action to get the overhead, and on the basis of that, we decide whether we want to carry it for one release or not.
I'll also raise this in this week's API review meeting, and I'll see if I can get some feedback from that group as well, because I have various questions about this too.
Here's the one context I want to share here. When we're doing this CRI, and we decided to make this is kind of like the internal API. I just want to make sure. Otherwise, we even cannot rule out this V1 Alpha 1 Container D and Cri in production. I just want to make sure, because we say, well, this is not affect our user-facing API, which is like our job as a data plan owner, and our job to maintain that compatibility and the smooth aggregation, all those kind of things we just discussed, we consent. And but for user, that's not exposed to the end user. So I just want to share everyone here. So that's why we from day one, we remove, there's the many concern that time from the API reviewer, and we just say, okay, that's our job. This is our internal API. We carry on those things. That's why we never.
The only problem, in the actual implementation, there was an internal API, but for the on the Cri side of it, the internal API ended up bleeding, some of the Cri types. So that's what's going on. We didn't have pure internal types in all cases, and that Sasha's PR addresses that issue.
So is there anything, I'm just trying to think if we could approach this with a different technical solution, like I think the worst case would be that if you're running kubelets in resource constrained environments, which the world is doing, the idea of every runtime invocation having to do a type marshal to an internal format and then generating the garbage from that is particularly stressing to me. Is there anything we can do? I don't even, compile time flags aren't right, but anything that we could do? Because if you got this alternate kubelet version, it would do the internal marshaling, because this would significantly, anything that significantly 2x's the garbage cost on mainline kubelet paths is actually a real production concern for me.
So just to make sure you caught it, when I said we were doing Marshall and Marshall in container D, I didn't mean that all of the changes that Sasha we're doing Marshall and Marshall across the API. I merely meant that when you connect to the V1 Alpha 2 API in container D, it will do a Marshall and Marshall cycle to the V1 APIs, which are implemented natively in container.
Yeah, what the runtime does on the server side of the interface is the runtime's choice there. I guess on the kubelet side, what I was worried about is if we've gone down a path that says if I get V1 or V1 Alpha 1, we always marshal to an internal form. And I worry that that overhead measurement, I guess, Sasha and Mernal and Mike, if you could get is really
what you're asking about. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Right now the kubelet is dominated, like the GC cycle is too high, basically, and we have an issue open on the C advisor side, and worry is this will add more to that GC pressure.
I wanted also to comment on Don, your comment about like we shouldn't spill this over to end users. I think if you only support V1 Alpha 1 for one release, then it will be spilled over to end users. End users will be notified next release that their version of Containerd is not compatible with their version of Kubernetes if they haven't updated Containerd from 1.5. So I think it will be spilled over. It's just a matter of like, do we do it this release or we do it next release? They will see it.
When I talk about the end user at this moment, it's more like the talk about the developer. I'm not talking about the vendor provider. So that's why earlier I said, okay, do we want to do the bundle release, which is like the admin and the creator of the cluster and then do the bundle things. Instead, they have the different version of the Containerd, right? So I think that, what it is our user using Kubernetes. In the past, many releases, Kubernetes actually doing the bundle release, right? So we did, I know today we didn't do that, but in the past, if you look at the old version, we did say, oh, what kind of version of the Docker we validate? What kind of version of the Containerd we validate? We basically, okay, here it is one, and we only support those limited version. So later we lose this one because it's we have more container runtime. So we decided not, but I think about with you, most of the use like the vendor for the Kubernetes provider actually doing this node level bundle release. If we still that's the cases, then we basically don't need to support more than one version here. Right? So you just have to call out. That's but to make their life easier, also we give them like the transaction aggregation, like one release, call out that alert, or you have to prepare to switch to the V1 version. So that's kind of the things we are talking about. There's the overhead. We cannot forever support every combination. Community, I don't think about we can do that. We have to call out.
But
Yeah, I agree with
we have also kubeadm, which potentially might need to check what the runtime provided is compatible. And when it will be also burden to like tools like kubespray, which deploys also with clusters.
Right. Well, I guess the key action is we'll just get that measurement, and if that measurement when we come back maybe in our next meeting is quantified, we can figure out both the cost to the consumer who is having to have the kubelet pay for this overhead of marshaling, and then the cost to the community to cognitively contain it, and that, but at least we'll have some data. So yeah, let's I guess try to get that in our next meeting.
Yeah.
We have a performance expert that wants to volunteer.
So, Mike, we actually are measuring node overhead at the lowest granularity you could imagine right now. And I think both Mernal and I have another hour meeting afterwards where we're trying to find more optimization paths. So like this is a bit of a personal topic for me just because of how much time we've been spending to try to figure out how to optimize the node overhead.
Okay. Cool.
Leila, do we have more
Do we
topics?
have anything else? I don't think we do. Sorry, I was adding, I added all of this. This is a great discussion, and hopefully we can get the recording up too for additional context. I added all of this as well to the API review agenda for this week. So hopefully I can also take a look at it there. See what folks have to say about that with all of the concerns that we've discussed today as well. Yeah, doesn't look like there's any more agenda items, so I'm happy to call the meeting for today. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alana.